Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, where we are talking about the NBA playoffs from the weekend. We do, though, have, and this is the first time I get to use it, so we'll see how it goes, but we have some breaking news from the GSMC Sports Network as Jets quarterback Zach Wilson has been traded to the Denver Broncos in a surprising move here. Jets had been looking to make a move with Wilson, but there really wasn't much market for him for a lot of time here. But Zach Wilson now gets his fresh start in Denver, where they have a lot of questions at the quarterback position. He could potentially find his way into playing more of a role, but we have a whole lot to do NBA playoffs wise, so we will maybe pick up on that news a little bit more in the latter half of the show, but did just get the notification from Ian Rappaport, so I wanted to just at least address that. Now though, the Eastern Conference playoffs here, where we had a handful of sort of underwhelming games in terms of, how competitive they were, but we did get a very fun one in the Knicks versus the 76ers on Saturday evening, or it was Saturday evening, but the Knicks ended up on top in this one, 111-104. And this was definitely a little bit of a concerning one if you are a 76ers fan. And it's, they were not expected to win this game in New York in game one. But this was concerning because of Joel Embiid and the status of his injury, where if you look at the box score, he did have a very big game, scoring 29 points. But at the same time, the real concerning moment for him was in that second quarter where he spun around a defender, he threw a lob to himself off the backboard, and when he came down, he dunked it. It was his first time dunking since he returned from his injury, and he went down. His face, it looked like he was, seeing ghosts, just sort of blankly staring up into the air, where he came down. That left knee that he's been dealing with injury with was clearly bothering him, and we weren't sure. Now, he actually was able to come back in the second half, and again, was still on the court, still provides a level of presence for Philadelphia, but at the same time, it was not very convincing in terms of the 76ers having a chance. Now, they were still in this game technically, but it was without Jalen Brunson playing his best game. He was really struggling from the field in this one, 8 of 26. So you're going to eventually get a better version of Jalen Brunson. And I feel like this was a really concerning loss for Philadelphia, where it's definitely a different conversation if Embiid is healthy. I just don't know how you can really think that this is going to hold up through an entire playoff run. And we're going to dive more into Embiid's injury in the next segment, so I don't want to spend this whole segment here talking about it. But at least sort of from this game itself, what I did find interesting, sort of related to the Embiid injury as well, is the fact that the defense that the 76ers were playing, which I thought was pretty impressive in a lot of this game, but what was really standing out to me was the fact that when they were doing the Knicks were doing this pick and roll action, instead of having Embiid come up and put extra miles on himself, they were having the wing defenders sort of close in, a lot of the time helping off of Josh Hart in order to contest Brunson at the top, and it worked. It threw Brunson off of his game. Now, if you look at what happened in the fourth quarter, you can definitely argue that this was a mistake, because Josh Hart ends up knocking down those two big threes that help put the Knicks up on top in this one. I wouldn't say that the strategy as a whole was flawed, because again, they're also trying to do this in order to overcome Embiid and his injury, but is definitely going to be an interesting conversation with Nick Nurse and his coaching staff. because, again, did a pretty solid job of limiting New York's offense in this game. But for them themselves, I think that it's going to be very tricky for them because of the fact that Embiid, again, he can get his individual points, but how far is that going to sort of push them as a whole? Also, the fact that, their bench production has just been, and I know Nick Batum came up massive in that Miami game in the play-in tournament, so you have to give them credit for that, but really, we're just seeing, a very diminished bench where, Batum, he's only able to give you 3 points in this one, and Buddy Hield, who was their big-time addition during the trade deadline, and this was their statement of saying, no, we are still going to try and be competitive in the postseason this year once Embiid comes back. They brought him in for shooting, and he sort of seems gun-shy right now. This has been a couple consecutive games for him, where in this one he only plays 11 minutes, so doesn't even get that much run time. And when he does, he only takes 2 shots, one of them being from 3. You're going to need more from him and from this bench in general that only gave them 7 points in this game in particular. So I really don't feel good about Philly in terms of this postseason, but if you have any argument for why the Sixers can come back and win this, I'm all ears. But again, I think the Embiid injury status is going to be sort of the nail in the coffin for them. But moving on here, we had the Heat and the Celtics again. Level of quality with some of these games drops off from there after that Knicks thriller. But the Celtics just sort of jumped on the Heat early and didn't really let off. I know that there was a little bit of buzz there in the fourth quarter as the Heat were able to get it closer. We saw the Celtics blow a couple big-time leads this season, but the Celtics do end up winning by 20 points. I just feel like it was such a difference this year, and keep in mind, obviously, Jimmy Butler currently out, probably won't be back for the entire season. Makes this an extremely different Heat team, and if he is there, it's a very different conversation. But I do genuinely believe that this is also a different Celtics team than the Heat faced in the Eastern Conference Finals last year because of the addition specifically of Kristaps Porzingis. I think makes everything so much easier for the Celtics, specifically dealing with the Miami zone defense, which we know can be a monster. It killed the Celtics in the postseason last year. We saw the effect that it had in the first half of the 76ers game, and Porzingis just really throws a wrench in all of this because of his ability to get inside the zone, right around that free throw line, have size mismatches against smaller opponents, and he made them pay. Specifically, that first half is where he was his most effective, but he can also spread out as well. There's also a fact of the matter that, as much as Al Horford is a true veteran and he's a massive piece for the Celtics team, he's not necessarily somebody who is able to make a smaller opponent pay on the block, and I do think that Kristaps Porzingis can be that. So the Heat switch everything defense that they do all the time as well, because of the fact that Bam Adebayo, they are fully comfortable with him guarding anybody. It's much more difficult to switch a guard onto Porzingis in comparison to Horford, and that's why I felt like throughout this entire game, the Celtics were just able to get off high-quality shot attempts as opposed to Miami, who they really had to work for theirs. Now, with the Celtics, you see in this game, they shot 49 threes, which is also sort of a concern with the Celtics. Are they going to get too reliant on the threes? I didn't think it was an issue in this game, but if you're looking big picture here for the Celtics, could this become an issue for them? We'll see, but a dominant win, at least to start off the playoffs here. We also had the Pacers face off against the Bucks yesterday, and the shorthanded Bucks without Giannis Antetokounmpo were just really able to sort of take it to Indiana, who it looked like this was a young core that didn't have the postseason experience necessarily of a Milwaukee, and it's not like the Bucks are the exact same team, obviously, that won the finals in 2021, but they have Damian Lillard, who was a big time player in Portland. I know that the postseason experience is a little spotty there, but of course led the Trailblazers to the Western Conference Finals once, and he comes out and he was dominant in that first half, scoring 35 points. Now, went scoreless in the second half, so I know that some people are sort of pointing to that as a concern. I just don't really think it was all that big of an issue because of the fact that Indiana was throwing just about everything at him in that second half defensively, and yet the others were still able to make it happen. I was more concerned about the Pacers than impressed by the Bucks in this game, though, where Tyrese Halliburton, for as much as he sort of lit the world on fire for a bit earlier in the season with his performances, he just has not been the same player really since the play-in tournament in the fall, where in this game, just 9 points. He took 7 shots as a whole. I think it was, 3 of them that came late in the fourth quarter when the game was already over. He's just been very passive from an individual scoring standpoint, which is fine. He's always been a pass-first point guard. And in this game, he racks up 8 assists. So, it's hard to fully dump on him for that necessarily. But this is a player in Tyrese who was being put into conversations with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and, others for who is the best point guard in the NBA. And while I still really like Tyrese Halliburton, I felt like I was probably higher on him than a lot of people were headed into the regular season. This was definitely a disappointing look for him. Now, can definitely still come back from it. You can't just overreact to game one, but definitely underwhelming there. And the Pacers, their defense was not very good in this game. Now, once they started taking Lillard out of the game, things sort of got a little testier, but still, it just was not a great look for them. It felt like the Bucks could get to the rim whenever they wanted to. Now, they were definitely leaning on a Lillard who was, firing away from 3 and knocking down deep contested shots, so they weren't necessarily looking to get to the rim quite as much, but it's a Pacers team that has never this season had a particularly great defense at the rim, and the final numbers don't look that bad either. I just felt like a lot of it looked very easy for the Bucks, and then to go along with the fact that this Pacers offense, which was one of the, I think they did finish as the highest scoring offense during the regular season, they just didn't show up, really. Siakam was the only one who, he was actually great in that first half in particular with 20 plus, but it was just overshadowed by Dame's 35 in the half, and then Siakam ends up finishing with 36 points himself. I feel like the way that he was sort of running the break, trying to get out in transition a little bit more, and not letting Milwaukee set up in the half-court defense. Not that they were a particularly great half-court defense team anyways, but still, that's what we saw with Milwaukee a lot this year, is they struggled in transition, and I felt like Siakam was the only one that really had that edge to him to make it happen. Miles Turner, Aaron Nesmith both really struggled from the field as well. So this is a game, learning experience for the Pacers. If you were picking the Pacers headed into it, I wouldn't say that this is, full panic mode necessarily, but they have a lot of things to definitely look back on in this game and make adjustments. Feel bad here because I feel like it's the most disrespected series in the playoffs, but we are running out of time a little bit in this segment. So briefly here on the Cavs and the Magic, I guess this is just a situation. It's not going to be the most popular series because neither of the offenses necessarily are extremely high scoring, both smaller markets, but it was also just a very ugly game to start off the series. The Magic put up just 83 points, and I think that, again, it's very encouraging how they were able to take the step during this regular season. They were in contention for the 2 seed for a bunch of it. They're finally getting this postseason experience, but they're just still clearly a year away when it comes to their offense they're going to have to make some sort of adjustments in the offseason to address that. For the Cavs here, I mean, Donovan Mitchell, we know that he is a different version of himself when he's in the playoffs. He puts up 30 in this game as well. And the Cavs are a very interesting team here. Sneaky, under a lot of pressure. Not that the national media factor would necessarily get on them all too much, but when it comes to their roster construction, from the fits of both Mitchell and Garland as a tandem, Allen and Mobley as a tandem, and the fact that Mitchell might be on his way out in these next couple of years as well, if the Cavs don't start putting together an environment for Mitchell there that he wants to be a part of long term. So I guess we'll see. Mobley also, I gotta say, someone who I've been sort of up and down on at times. He did have some really nice post control in the first half of this game, sort of trailed off a little bit in the second half, but I did like some of what I saw from him as well. But that is all we have time for. We're running a little bit behind today, but just stick with us here. We are going to be taking this next break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into some injury updates surrounding Kawhi Leonard and Joel Embiid. So stick with us, and we will be right back.